Becoming a Zipper by Trendal. Suddenly, I became aware of a series of strange zipper-like patterns across the room, running parallel with the floor. Each line was about a meter in distance from any other line. Then I became aware of the fact that everything I was seeing was losing its depth and becoming flat like a piece of paper, except there were layers of these papers all standing up straight from the floor. I could move around between the layers in my bedroom. It was kind of like walking through a room filled with freestanding cardboard cutouts with pictures of my room on them. One cutout would be my computer and desk, another my bed, and so on. The zipper lines were becoming more and more pronounced as everything in my vision flattened up. Then I noticed the presence of a few beings around me, whom I thought to be my friends, who were all in the room at the time. Each of these beings was attached to one of the zipper lines in some way I can't describe. I could see them as human form, and they looked exactly like my friends. But I knew that they were all attached to the zipper lines, too. The idea was passed to me from somewhere that these people were the heads of the zippers that held reality together. This was, I assure you, one of the most intricate horrors I have ever come across. The idea that these people were all that stood between reality and nothingness scared the living shit out of me. To my complete horror, I watched as one of my former friends began to walk along the zipper line with an insane grin on his face. Reality began to unzip. I don't know how else to describe it. It looked exactly like a zipper being undone. The two sections of reality that were previously joined by the zipper began to spread apart, and infinite blackness was the only thing left between the sheets of reality. My friends, I realized, were only some benevolent consciousness wearing their skin, each with the same sick grin on their face. They would unzip their zipper while goading me into letting it happen. This led me to the conclusion that I, somehow, was in control of the fate of reality. I fixed the idea firmly in my head that everything would stop and reality would zip itself back up. This did not work. Now I realized that I had no control over this situation, and never had. The beings wearing my friends' faces changed from goading and sneaky to angry and forceful. I was chased out of the room into the kitchen. I became aware of the fact that I could not move as I thought I should be able to move. There was some form of resistance whenever I moved, accompanied with a strange unzipping sound. I was now a zipperhead, and as I ran, I was unzipping reality behind me. Panic hit me very fast. I tried to flee the kitchen as the other zippers had followed me and were trying to catch up to me for what I thought was some purely evil reason. It was imperative that I stay ahead of them if I were to survive. I made my way through the living room, down the back hallway of my house, out the back door. Reality now completely coming apart around me. Everything had gone quiet, except for the noise of the other zippers following me, and the noise of my own zipper made as I moved. I was now in a very real state of panic as I watched in horror as my house unzipped from reality. I was not safe outside either, I realized, but it was too late to do anything. Somehow I had got the idea that I needed to let go. This wasn't worth fighting any longer. I watched with a growing sense of calm as 4 other zipper lines converged on me. Just as reality was finishing its unzipping, I noticed the presence of one of my friends. He was standing in front of me, looking down at my face. He's taller than I am. He kept asking, "Why are you outside?" I realized that he was my friend from before, not the head of a zipper. I looked as if I was seeing him through a tunnel in the center of my vision. The tunnel widened, and reality as I knew it came back to me all at once. I was outside, but how? What had happened? What had I just experienced? I allowed myself to be led back into the house, still too confused to do or say anything. A couple hours later, by the time I went to bed, I could remember everything clearly, and still do. I'd have to say that salvia is by far the strangest drug I have ever come across. It's like a mixture of ketamine, dramamine, and shrooms, plus something entirely novel. I would not call it fun at all except at lower doses. Everything I witnessed seemed very real as it happened. And I had always been the head of a zipper. I remember having the thought, which scared me, that the zippers of reality had always been there, and I had always been the head of a zipper. It was as if I was pretending all along that reality was the way it is, and that somehow I had forgotten the nature of my true existence. It was being shown my true nature, I thought. Strangest thing to ever happen to me. Waves of Unzipping Leather by David. I first heard about salvia during a news report on Howard Stern's show. I recently quit smoking pot and miss it. I was intrigued by the news story on Howard Stern, and I looked into salvia a little further. Later that evening, I walked down to a local head shop and purchased 1 gram of Salvia 10X. I have used drugs frequently through my life, and honestly thought that this would be a simple body high and maybe some light hallucinations. I briefly researched how best to intake the salvia, and I decided that my bong would work best. I packed a small bong hit, sat down in my living room chair, and turned off the television and stereo. I took a small hit and felt a slight sensation. I took a second hit to finish the bowl, and before I was able to put the bong down, I began to experience some of the most intense trails that I've ever experienced. At first I thought things are fine. I've done a lot of acid and mushrooms, so I'm mentally strong enough to realize what is happening. The experience then became much more intense very quickly. It felt like an out-of-body experience, as though I had been transported back to my parents' bedroom in my childhood home. I had lost all sense of reality. The best description that I can use to explain is that it was as if waves of leather were being unzipped from behind me and moved in front of me, one after another, faster and faster, with each wave freezing in time. I tried to fight my way out of these waves, but I was unable to escape. At some point I felt that I was experiencing death, that this is what death must be like when it comes. I believe that I began to fight this, and began thinking that I had just realized the true reality of life. I think that I began saying "no way" over and over. No way. Unable to accept what I was believing. I then finally accepted this reality that I was dying and began to relax. I believed that I could see the last of the waves of unzipping leather from my peripheral vision and began to prepare for the last wave. I stood up with my bong in hand, and since I was now accepting the fact that life was simply a wave after wave of unzipping leather frozen in time, I took the bong and flipped it in the air end over end to capture it in one of the waves. I lied back down on the floor believing that I could see the last of the waves. As the back of my head began to melt into the waves of unzipping leather, I truly believed that death had come to me. Obviously, after a short period of time, I began to regain my faculties. I must have repeated "oh my fucking god" 1,000 times as I slowly came back to reality. This was by far the most intense experience that I have ever felt in my life. I was alone when I did this experiment. Again, having done lots of hallucinogens in my life, I assumed that this would not be a major experience. I live in a second-story apartment, and I feel beyond grateful that I did not take a leap off the balcony to try catching myself in one of the waves of leather frozen in time. Do not use this without someone present to ensure your safety. I have not been able to stop thinking about this experience since last night. The visual experience most reminded me of an Alex Gray painting. Message from Mother by Door. I smoked it out of a water pipe. 3 good hits of straight leaf, no extract. I then lay back with my eyes closed. I felt a distinct impression of gently materializing inside of a shimmering aquatic antechamber, some kind of entry hall or foyer. I saw a beautiful green lady float up to me. She had the sweetest, most benevolent face, full of infinite love and patience and kindness towards me. She looked at me, shook her head no gently, playfully tapped me on the nose, and swam away. That was my experience. I knew I had not broken through, that she had told me that I was not yet ready and to come back later. I thought no more about doing Salvia Divinorum for a long time. Occasionally she entered my thoughts, but I knew that my next experience would happen when I was supposed to. That was a couple of years ago. Fast forward to October 29th, 2005. One of the people I was staying with for a month went to a festival where he bought some 7x fortified leaf. He came back and 5 of us decided to try it. We turned the lights down and got out the bubbler. The guy who had bought the stuff packed a bowl, hit it a couple times, and passed it to me. I puffed and passed it on, etc. My puffs were tentative, and nothing happened to me or anyone else, while the guy who packed and started the bowl had a nice little experience during which he laughed a couple of times. We laughed nervously with him, wondering what was so damn funny. When he came out of it, he said how it was such a good punch in the face, and how it made him feel like a warrior for being able to go in there. I felt rejected. I had good, pure intentions. I truly wanted to know what the plant had to tell me. I wanted in there. Part of me hesitated, and I thought for a second that maybe I was someone who wasn't meant to go there at all. My desire to know got the better of me though, and a fresh bowl was packed for me. I ripped 2 huge hits. After the second hit, I felt a big golden wow envelop me, and I knew I was going whether I liked it or not. I almost felt her say, "Okay, little man, you asked for it." I quickly lost all control of my body. I was immediately plunged into these repeating frames of time, and as I had neglected to close my eyes, I felt the room I was in, my universe and myself being completely and quite literally unzipped. I saw the fucking teeth of the zipper separating. It was so uncomfortable, to the point of being nearly unbearable, but a voice said, "Just hang on and ride it out." I knew I had to follow the zipper all the way around, and that it would zip back up. Simultaneously, during and or after this terrifying segment, I was aware of the letters. At this point, I must again stress that I had still, quite foolishly, done no research on this plant. I had never heard or read about the mnemonic experiential scale. But somehow there, my helpless, terrified, stripped down and unzipped, she could see me, my bare essence, and she was judging me, consciousness was. Bouncing along like a piece of fruit in a Miss Pac-Man maze. Bouncing from letter to letter of the word salvia. With each successive letter, the last letter would fall off in scales, and another layer or level would peel away and open up to the next. It was this horrible little game that I was playing. I knew that once you decide to play this game, you have to finish it out. I knew it was the ultimate, and it was so cutesy with this colorful, pastel Sesame Street kind of vibe, which made it all the more horribly macabre and sinister at the same time. Because everything else had been unzipped, it was all there was. This trip has been brought to you by the letter S, the letter A, the letter L, etc. It was so synthetic and wrong, like she was saying, "Look at me, I'm a designer plant fucking experience now. Are you enjoying me?" I am shuddering as I type this. I was out of control. I knew somehow I was not going to the end of this word. This relieved me. Then there was a blending conversion of the word salvia and salvation, and the word divinorum became damnation. I knew this was the name of the game we were playing, Salvation Damnation. There was a passing that happened. I was passing along something in a chain of people, We were passing along some kind of information or awareness. Here, let me show you this. Here, let me show you this. Here, let me show you this. The main person I remember who was next to me in the chain was my friend who had just told me about Salvia. Time traveled back to a point at which we'd had a conversation about her long ago. He was telling me, you can hang on to a good thought and have it, or you can have a bad thought with it and be stuck holding that. Be careful. I was also aware that I had been in this place before. This wasn't the first time I had played this game. After this, things eased up a bit, and there was a tiny bearable moment where I knew how to exist as a smoke or vapor, in between layers of reality, and I was becoming me again. Then my surroundings came back into view, the room and people around me, but the choppiness of the overlapping time frames of re-entry was again so brutal to me that I began to get angry and distressed, and quite impatient for it to be over. I came back in my body enough to try to climb over the back of the couch, but I realized I was going to fuck up the room if I tried to do that too soon, so I turned back around and felt her tell me, "Hold on just a second longer. We'll get you out of here. It's almost over." I was holding my breath, my face so red it was about to pop, my companions yelling at me to breathe, and I inhaled, exhaled a horrible scream, and then it was like coming out of this tube, this fleshy living exit tube, and it spit me out. I fell back into my body with a heavy thud, slumping all the way back forward till I was laying over on my knees, staring at the floor. It was over. One of my first spoken coherent thoughts was, how cruel that plant was to do that to me. How cruel! My next was, crazy, can you help it? Crazy, can you help it? Crazy, can you help it? I asked my sitters if I had repeated that or if anyone else had said it. The answer was no. Since I had been so terrified and resisted throughout the whole experience, there were parts of the experience that I had to block out as being too much for my sanity to handle at this time. I knew that there had been a game of Getcha Gimme, a game of reshuffling, of alphabet dominoes, which is how I described it afterwards in my journal, but I wasn't sure what the letters had been. I did know that there was something horribly artificial about the letters, like it was some fucked up trademarked Parker Brothers board game, ahem, which wasn't at all jiving with the impression of what entheogen exploration is supposed to be all about. I remembered being acutely aware of this within the trip. When the letter bouncing started happening, I was shocked that these letters seemed infused, built into the experience, as though by the manufacturers, and I wondered if it was like the title splash screen of a video game, and everyone who smoked her saw the same letters right before their game started, before their funhouse experience became whatever it became. I was driving with a buddy yesterday. We were talking about my experience, which was still maddeningly foggy to me. I knew there were letters in passing and a game that wasn't at all a game, and that I had some heavy good and evil overtones that were continuing to fuck with me. In the middle of the conversation, he mentioned that he'd done some online research, which my dumb lazy ass still had not done, and that he'd found out that there was a scale based on the letters of the word Salvia that denoted the intensity of your trip. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. He had, with one sentence, blown the door off my sepulcher in which I had sealed away those traumatic secrets. I immediately got on the computer when I arrived home and started soaking in everything I could about the history and use of Salvia. I started thinking about what the experience must have meant. To my knowledge thus far, no one else has seen those letters integrated into their experience the way I did. The whole thing really fucking creeps me out. So here's the conclusion I have reached. I think that Salvia is not very pleased that she is being put into little foil packets, sometimes even artificially flavored, and sold to the general public, many of whom do not understand at all what they are doing, for fucking profit by people who are exploiting her as if she were some kind of hallucinogenic fad. She is not some cute little witch's toy. She is certainly not a meditation tool. She is a healer, not a cosmic video game. I think she feels as though she is being taxed beyond her nature, and that her space is being invaded and her gifts misused by people who are merely curious as to where they will go and what they will see. I don't think we're all supposed to be going there. Only certain people who are properly trained and full of certain kind of purpose should be doing this. As many accounts as there have been of people who have tried it once and had experiences so intense and on par with death, or the universe folding up or being sucked away, and then they say they'll never do it again. I know for my part that I won't be disturbing her again. What you do is your choice. I got my message loud and clear, and I feel with every cell of my being that she wanted me to put this experience out there for people to read. I now have done as I feel she has asked me to do. I am confident that this will reach those who need to see it. You can take that and do with it what you will. I pray that you will all make wise decisions concerning your minds and souls. No matter what you do in your lives, it affects all of us. The Time I Went to Hell and Became a Zipper by Dapanda. Frustrated with my results so far, I figured the best way to get the most amount of smoke from the salvia was to make a gravity bong. At this point my girlfriend was home, my dad went to bed, and my little brother was busy playing video games on his computer. I figured based on my experiences from before, I wouldn't need a sober spotter as I had done before. Big mistake. I put the bong down and hold the hit in. I had read that you should hold the smoke in for about 30 seconds for the best result, so I started counting. 1, 2, 3. All of the day's events had run through my head, and it seemed like it had gone by in an instant. As I was recalling everything, I seemed to be forgetting things at the same rate, like remembering a dream. 4, 5. I didn't get to 6 by this point. I was looking at my porch. My vision became just a series of frames, taking more and more time to move on to the next frame. Before I could even get to 6, I had forgotten that I had even took salvia, as my consciousness started to leave my body. This part is a bit hard to explain, but I'll do my best. As I said, my vision became just a series of frames, and at this point the frames had stopped coming. My consciousness had left my body behind as if it fell through the gaps in frames. I no longer had any sense of my body and where and who I was and everything around me. I was no longer receiving any sensory information from my body. Everything from here on out was totally created by my mind with the help of the salvia. The next thing I knew, I was being shown a gigantic wheel made up of the frames that I had been seeing before, turning into infinity. Running down the middle of this wheel was a zipper wrapping around it. As the wheel turned, the zipper moved with it, unzipping every frame one by one. I saw that the universe is being made up of frames that are constantly being destroyed by being unzipped. The trip got even worse as the more I watched the wheel, the more I started to become part of the zipper. My consciousness got stuck in the zipper. I felt myself become unzipped as the wheel turned over each frame, screaming in agony every time I was destroyed as the frames were unzipped, only to be recreated and unzipped again on the wheel. This went on for an agonizing eternity. I had to try to fight it. All the while I was hearing laughter as if I was being mocked by some unknown beings. I fought with it, feeling like I was being pulled off of the wheel while the wheel was trying to pull me back in. Eventually I was thrown back, as if I was playing tug of war and the opposing side had let go. I watched as the wheel that I had just freed myself from rolled over me. As I got close, I could see the frame on the wheel that was going to collide with me. I saw a house that I had never seen with a porch light on, with a cat standing in front staring at me, and a person running towards me. I realized that when the wheel rolled over me, the frame would collide with me and I was going to be forced into whoever's body was looking at the house. I heard a woman tell me that this was my body, looking at my house with my cat on the porch, but I know better. I screamed in terror as I was being forced into a body that wasn't mine, yelling, "That's not my cat, this is fucking terrifying." But it was too late, I was in this unfamiliar body. I ran towards the front door to this house, brushing by the strange person who was running towards me. As I got to the house, I slowly started to remember that this was my house that I had seen, and my cat, Captain Carl, who had been looking at me, and my very scared and concerned brother who was running towards me. As I got to the house, I slowly started to remember that this was my house that I had seen, and my cat, Captain Carl, who had been looking at me, and my very scared, concerned brother who was running towards me. As I got to the front door, I saw my dad standing in the doorway, looking just as scared as my brother. I ran up and hugged him. I heard him start to tell my brother to call an ambulance as I got inside. At this point, I started to remember that I had taken Salvia 15 minutes ago and began explaining the situation. Apparently, I had blacked out during the trip and I had actually fallen off the deck. I'm not sure if I fell down the railing or down the stairs, but I'm pretty badly bruised on my hip, neck, and arm. And I started screaming, unintelligibly, alerting them. This was one of the single most terrifying experiences I have ever had. The whole time I had been on the wheel, I was sure that I had died and was going to be stuck in hell for all eternity. I absolutely terrified my family and hurt myself without even knowing it. Needless to say, I won't be doing Salvia again for a long time, if ever again. If I could go back, there would be a lot of things I would have done differently. Have a sober trip sitter, not use such a potent salvia, not use the gravity bong, not do it around my family, not do it standing up, not underestimate the sheer power of this drug. Seriously, if you're thinking about doing salvia, work your way up to higher potencies, smoke it right, and always have someone sober there to make sure you don't hurt yourself. Untitled by FunkMasterShroom. Now I placed what I thought was a small amount of 20x extract into my bong, mixed with a little bit of a JWH018 smoking blend, and ripped one fat haul off of it to do a smaller tester dose. Next thing I know, I'm blasted into full salvia land, but it was lagged, like I would progress through the experience but be lagged behind somehow, then suddenly catch up, and then I or it would lag again and catch up and so on. But by contrast, it seemed to be fluid at the same time. Very strange and difficult to explain. Now, as I feel the familiar taste and smell and sensations of pressure and stretching through my body, the reality around me seemed to freeze. This reality and I were almost between reality. To the left of me, near the door of my apartment, I was on the living room couch. Suddenly, a zipper unfolds. Literally, a zipper in the fabric of this reality, and out through the zipper stepped two of my best friends, Shay25 here on the Shroomery, and his girlfriend. Though I somehow knew it wasn't really them, it was other beings, and they were using these forms at the moment. For my ease, familiarity, or what, I don't know. They both walked up to me with large grins on their face, but a strange, almost regretful look in their eyes. During this, the lag catch-up process was still happening. I believe this was due to the DXM. Anyway, I had the most terrible feeling that something was wrong, as I often do with salvia, not to mention a painful sensation horizontally through my face and waist. And Shay's girlfriend, started to speak to me, saying something along the lines of, "Oh look, you smoked salvia again. We didn't expect you to do this. Don't you remember what happens? Now we have to go through this all again." As she said this, I couldn't find myself able to speak, but somehow I was communicating with them telepathically, and they convinced me somehow that I had to leave. I didn't understand what that meant, but suddenly they showed me all the different frames of myself in the now moment. I could see all the different moments of me stretching off behind into the past, and way off in front of me into the future. I was looking at it like a third-part perspective, and there I was sitting on the couch, with all these other moments of me going off through the walls into the past and into the future, what I'd consider to be depth perception of the fourth dimension. As I was observing this, I focused in on person 3, moments behind where I was when I just entered the Salvia realm, and A suddenly told me that they would switch the present me with the third me 3 moments earlier. I didn't quite grasp what all this meant at the time, but suddenly I was back in first person perspective. Shay and A both turned to their right, and this giant turning wheel cog came up out of reality into my living room. It was covered in bodies, my bodies, all wearing different outfits. A huge collection of me's piled together into this gigantic wheel. Shay and A, the beings, looked at the wheel and it rolled like a giant wheel on The Price is Right, and they scanned through the bodies a bit, before stopping and then levitating one of the me's from the wheel down next to me. At this point I was feeling my body a lot more, and it felt like my legs were stuck inside the floor or couch. I couldn't move my lower half, and could barely move my arms, but I could look around easily enough. I felt trapped though, and it was painfully so. As they summoned this other me next to me, he was in a catatonic-like state, but was standing and gently came out of it. He looked at me, smiled and said hi, and I looked back to Shay and A, and they kinda smiled and shrugged. There was a very carnival-esque feeling, but with a nightmarish undertone. Big grins and smiling faces, but dark and menacing feelings in my gut and intuition. I then began to shift to my left and slide over towards the wheel. I suddenly got even more scared because I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't even know what was going to happen. They kind of said goodbye and just plainly watched me shift over, with smiles on their faces, that weird regretful look in their eyes. Except the other me, I looked kinda confused and waved at me. Just before I was about to get into the bottom of this giant body wheel, I managed to lift my arms up and actually open my mouth to speak. It felt as though I was sinking into a catatonic-like state, like what the other me was in before he came off the wheel. I asked out loud, what is going to happen to me, with an intense feeling of fear and regret for putting myself into this position. I had totally forgotten I had smoked salvia, and this all seemed vividly real, if not at all normal. I was sort of shifted into and under the wheel, like on a conveyor belt, and as I went under, it all went black. Light appeared again, and I was in a small and yet giant square room, with other bodies of me packed onto the walls and ceiling. There was one of me hanging from the ceiling from his waist as well, smiling down at me with a look of, you know what's coming. In the background outside this room, I could hear huge crashing noises that were getting closer and closer, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was in a crushing room. Rooms where people go to be squished into liquid. I looked to either side of me down this room, and the walls were doing the horror movie hall stretch thing, and I knew that they were about to close in on me any moment. I looked up at the ceiling me and said something like, oh, so this is what happens when you die, or something. Whatever just happened to me, like I said, I forgot I smoked salvia, and the higher dimensional beings just squish you into nothingness. Wonderful. I was filled with horror, fear, and then a wave of acceptance came over me, because I knew I was stuck, and there was no way out. I said goodbye to all my loved ones and waited, watching suddenly as the walls started rushing towards me. Just as the walls closed in, all went black, and after a moment I was standing in my living room again. I was now the other me that they picked out. I could barely believe it. I was this new, old from the past, me, and had the memory of the last me just being squished and all of that. It was dramatically flabbergasting. Shay and A then told me that I had to try and fit back into the right spot before I did the trip. I then suddenly saw the 4D expression of all the other me stretching out into the past and future, and I felt myself go through the wall behind my couch and tried to hover fly into the exact spot so I could return to reality. Remember no clipping from FPS? So this is where it got really painful, as I was starting to come back to this reality, but was somehow unable to fit into the proper frame position. It was exceedingly painful throughout my entire body, but particularly in my lower back and lower face, again like a horizontal line of pain in both places. Finally, I strained and pushed and made my way into the right spot, and the time freeze left. I looked around and noticed I didn't even see Shay and A leave, but they were gone, and the zipper opening was gone as well. Due to the DXM, I kept having the lag effect, where I would fall back into the whole experience over and over and stay stuck in it for a few moments before snapping back out. This was very much like vividly reliving a memory. It was strange, and I was remembering that I had just smoked salvia, and it made me feel like I couldn't quite get myself back to normal. Again, the DXM, which I also just remembered I was on. Giant Yellow Zipper of Reality by SmokeDro420. I tried salvia for the first time yesterday, and it was absolutely the most wild experience of my life. About half of the trip I don't remember, but the latter half I can remember somewhat clearly now. Me and two buddies skipped second period to go downtown and pick up some salvia from the head shop. We had about 2 to 3 hours till our next class, so we figured it would be cool to try some now. I had never smoked it before, but B and A both had once or twice. The store didn't have any 10x, so we tried 20, not really knowing how intense it would be. We bought it and found an alley where we could relax and toke. I packed a few bowls of hash and pot before we smoked the salvia. B took the first hit of the salvia. He took the whole bowl and held it in for about 30 seconds. After he lit it out, he started mumbling and couldn't sit up straight. He then stood up and stumbled for a few seconds before sitting back down. The next bowl was mine. A packed me a bigger hit than B, and I was prepared. I hit as hard as I could and held it in until I felt something. I felt my whole body shift and released the toke. I looked at the fence and the center bar shifted hugely. I mumbled a few words then blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a different universe, with tall, colorful, pointy skyscrapers and a man wearing an old-fashioned suit with a green cummerbund. He kept telling me stuff, but I don't remember any of it. This part of the trip seemed like a very vivid dream, and at no point did I realize that I had smoked a drug, or that I even existed. I totally forgot about the alley in my body. This seemed to be some deeper reality at the time, and it felt like my new life was beginning here. The man in the suit started laughing at me and chanting something when I blacked out again. There was a lot more to this experience, and at this point I was getting scared, because I didn't know where I was, how I got there, or even what I was. I was in a different dimension, and there was no escape. I thought I went insane. The next thing I remember is being half of a giant yellow zipper, and half of my body felt like it had been cut away in the shape of the zipper. All of a sudden, the whole universe that I had just made up started flipping by very fast like the pages of a book. I started flying and I was suddenly getting zipped up into the other half of the zipper. I saw people and things flash by, and the half of my body I could feel was zipping into each picture. I could feel half of my body zipping back into reality. There was an intense feeling in the right side of my body, like I was being dragged. A very raw feeling, not pain, but like there was something pulling on my skin. I started to remember how my life used to be at this point, and I wondered if I could ever get back. I thought to get back I would need to zip it all back up, so I pushed myself to zip it all up. I wasn't fitting into the last few sections though, and it felt like I was knocking my teeth out. Half of my face felt as though I had been dragged behind a car. When the zipper was nearing completion, I could see the end. I started feeling like I was getting pulled out of the zipper, and I was suddenly running down an alley. It turns out the alley I was running down was a hallucination of the alley that my body was in. I was still tripping out, but the alley was very vivid. I was chasing my friend B, who seemed to be showing me how to jump out of the Salvia trip. He was running as fast as he could, then jumping and stomping on his feet a certain way when he landed. I chased after him and tried to do it 4 or 5 times, and it wasn't letting me go. I tried again and ran after him and stomped exactly the way he did, and I was kicked back into reality. I regained consciousness and saw my friend B in front of me. The first thing I said was, "Wait, I have been here before." I was feeling incredibly stoned right then, and the zipper still felt like it was controlling half of my body. My right side felt numb. My friend A, who toked after I blacked out, was running down the alley like I was in my trip. I still didn't know where I was or who I was, but when I saw the pipe on the binder, I remembered that I had smoked some crazy shit. My brain was feeling very slow and my body felt exhausted. I started getting very scared of something and it felt very wrong. I felt like crying, and I proceeded to lie down on my jacket and close my eyes. I curled up into a ball and was scared of something. B told me that we had to get moving, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to be at home in bed. I was very scared and I kept muttering something's wrong because I didn't really understand what happened. I thought that I had gone insane and the dimension I experienced was my psyche. There was a man that guided me. I didn't mention it before, but he was present the whole trip and watched me zip everything back up, but disappeared when I was running down the alley. I'm starting to believe that man was my id, ego or superego, or possibly a combination of all three. That pretty much sums up my Salvia trip. It absolutely terrified me, because that small little pinch of powder took my entire world, chewed it up, and spit it out. I completely lost track of reality, and the trip felt 100% real. Simply not in this dimension. I don't know if I'll ever try this drug again, because of how much raw power it had. One hit of it completely destroyed me. I suggest you be careful with Salvia, as it is some scary, scary shit.